right, good afternoon, everyone. So tonight's show is going to run slightly differently. We are pre-recording tonight, and then we will air the recording at usual time, 7 o'clock. So as it is Reading, Writing, and Ralph, we will, of course, have Ralph Peluso, and we will, of course, have trivia questions. So those trivia questions, we will float them up on the screen, and as the show goes on, I will be watching the comments. So we won't have our lovely little "we have a winner" slide in, but we will still have winners, and you will be notified after tonight's show. And tonight's show, we have John Wasowicz to talk his murder mystery, Roaches Run. And I am super excited to hear this conversation because this is actually my first time working with John. So, of course, if you win the trivia questions, you can get a free signed copy of Roaches Run. We also have Jim Cuddy, who is the narrator of the audio version of Roaches Run. After the show, if you want, you can get a free copy of the audiobook on Audible by emailing me, grace@thezebrapress.com. And yep, you can get a free copy. You have to have an Audible subscription, so email me if you want a copy if you have an Audible subscription, and John will send a code for that. Let's see, what else do we have? Yep, so as you might know, he is the author of Roaches Run and 3 other Alexandria-based books, and I think that almost kind of makes these more mysterious. Like, it's a town you live in every day, but what else is there that's hiding out there? So, as we welcome Ralph, I am excited to get to know more about these books and about the city. So let's bring Ralph.
Hi, Grace.
Hi,
How are you
Ralph.
today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. It's a great day. The sun's still up, and so it's very unusual here to have the show.
I know, it's early.
Yeah, I'm excited to have John back on. This is the 3rd time he is on. He opened with our first show when we first did this in April of 2020. He closed the year last year, and he's closing the year this year.
Wow.
So
great.
It's wonderful to have John on, and his books are fast-paced, very fascinating, and Alexandria and DC metro area based. So let's bring
Yep,
John
I will
on.
bring him on in a second, but I also want to note, so you did mention he's closing the Reading, Writing, and Ralph of this year, so this is your last show of 2021. So guys, you'll have a couple weeks without Ralph, really sad, but we will be back in January with the full schedule, so just want to make note of that on your calendars. So now let's welcome John and Jim.
Hi, John. Hi, Jim.
Hey, Ralph. How are you?
Hi,
I'm
Ralph.
Fabulous. Hi, Jim. Good to meet you.
And you as well. Thank you.
This is a lot of fun. So, yeah, as I said, John's back on for the 3rd time. We're going to talk about Roaches Run, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about the previous books and the characters, and also play it forward to give us a sneak preview for his next book. So welcome, and we might as well get started. So let's do this, John. Just give a quick recap on your background and how you got into writing for the viewers, and then we'll also ask Jim to give a little bit about his background and how he got into narration.
Sure. So I've been in the practice of law since the 1980s. My first job was as a prosecutor in Arlington County. And that's where I came up with the fictional character Mo Katz, who I used to fictionalize cases that I had in the courthouse and sort of just tell stories to myself as I was driving in the car. My career in the law has continued. I still practice now, but Mo Katz remained with me, and in 2017, I authored the first of the 4 books, Dangerfield Island. And every year or 2 since then, I've been able to come out with a new book, Jones Point, and that was followed by Slater's Lane, and then Roaches Run, which is a brand new book which has come out now.
Great. And Jim, give our viewers tell them about yourself, where you grew up, how you came to get into narration, and and why you do it.
Thanks, Ralph. I'm actually a Washington, D.C. native. I have recently moved to North Carolina, but still have lots of close ties in the D.C. area, and especially in Alexandria in the Arlington area. And was in radio for about 15 years. I was on air. I did a bunch of production jobs as well. And with that, I had some interest in theater, although later in life I hadn't really done a whole lot. But I always had sort of that Walter Mitty mindset. And I think that helps with narration, especially when you're doing books and you're coming up with characterization. And my partner and I actually, we had a media company and we were helping John produce his first 3 books. And in that course of time, I actually started to narrate a couple of books on my own. And then it came time he was looking for another narrator for Roaches Run, and said, hey, I'd be happy to do it. And that's kind of where we are now.
Great.
Ralph, I just have to throw in that both Jim and Matt Lynch was his partner. We did our first book in 2017 with Bill Newman, and that was Dangerfield Island. Then we did a book with Derek McGinty. Then we did a book with WETA's Nicole Lacroix. And in each of them, Jim was front and center in the book itself, making sure everything worked well, while Matt was the sort of producer behind the scenes. So Jim was the perfect person to turn to for book 4. And frankly, with the pandemic and with us being unable to do the normal recording together as a group, Jim was able to individually narrate the book, feed all of the tapes to Matt, and voila, we had an audio book.
Great. That's fun to know, and it's funny how our lives evolve and intertwined, and that point comes out with a lot of your characters from where you started with Dangerfield Island to where the characters are today. They've transitioned, they've evolved, they've matured, and other things have happened to the relationships and all that. And we'll get to that in a second. But the one question that I always had is, we get familiar with areas in our life and we think we know the landscape. Everybody knows where Dangerfield Island is because there's a sign on the GW Parkway, and Slater's Lane because there's another sign on the Parkway. But how do you find the other places like Jones Point and Roaches Run? How do you come to know those, and why do you pick those to be sort of the centerpiece for where the novel unfolds?
So first I'll mention Jones Point and then Roaches Run. Jones Point is underneath the Wilson Bridge. It is the southernmost tip of the original District of Columbia. And there's actually a poster there demarcating its location. It's the perfect place under a bridge adjacent to the water for a murder to occur. And in Jones Point, it's where a body is dumped in the middle of the story. Roaches Run is one of the most heavily trafficked areas where nobody has ever stopped. It's like hiding in plain view. Roaches Run is across from Gravelly Point, north of Reagan National Airport. The only people who ever stop there are cab drivers and limo drivers who are picking up their fare at the airport. Otherwise, tens of thousands of cars drive by it. And I thought it was a perfect location, having driven by it thousands of times myself, for an event to occur that is central to the case.
Now, you have a map of Roaches Run, I think. Can we put that up, Grace? Right.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to I used to drive by that segment every day for 5-6 years, and I don't recall ever seeing a sign for Roaches Run, but maybe
so there is a sign, Ralph. The sign says Roaches Run waterfowl sanctuary, which is what it is. And if you're coming off of the 14th Street Bridge heading toward Alexandria, it's on the right-hand side of the parkway. It is a large body of water. The parkway dips, and you can take the exit into Roaches Run. It's almost like a turnoff at a NASCAR race, where it sort of scoops around the main drive. Now, what's interesting about the photo that you see is between the George and the Washington, demarcating the parkway, you can see a little squiggle. That's an area where you can get off of the parkway, go through the airport parking area, and then come back onto the parkway to access the 14th Street Bridge to return to the District of Columbia. And I used that route. It's a boomerang route where people can come from DC into Virginia and then get back into the District of Columbia with relative ease. And that becomes a sort of a clue as the book begins to evolve as to the practicality of things occurring at Roaches Run and then people appearing in the District of Columbia shortly thereafter.
Wow. It's certainly central to the plot and quite an interesting location. And it's wonderful you go about using those because people pass them every day and probably don't think of them in that context.
And Ralph, it's one of the reasons people buy my books in the Northern Virginia area. People will always say, Dangerfield Island, I know where that is. Or Slater's Lane, I used to live off of Slater's Lane. So it's become a very familiarity. And people who have emailed me enjoy the places, they're familiar with the places, the businesses, the streets. It all plays into the atmosphere that I'm trying to create in the series.
Yeah. People like myself say, oh yeah, I've been there. Dangerfield Island has a wonderful restaurant on it. So, or did. I don't know if it's still open, but
it's closed.
Did. It's closed. So there you go. All the plots have a murder involved, but this one has a little bit different of a backdrop. So it has to do with discourse in the country, and it sort of veils the real plot that's going on. So talk about that for an instant without any spoiler alerts.
Yeah, so there's been a lot going on in the country, both between COVID-19 and the protocols, the events of January 6th, the election. And I tried to take those events and memorialize them in a book of fiction. And I tried to use the dissension, the distinguishing characteristics in how we view things, and to embolden my characters with some of that stuff that I saw just so prevalent in the period from November into January as we slipped into 2021. It politicizes the book in ways that Jones Point or Slater's Lane had not been politicized, but I couldn't help it because it was so prevalent in such a part of our lives at that moment of time. And I've also found, Ralph, that I'm trying to capture history in a way. And I did this in book 3, Slater's Lane, which was really a COVID-19 book. That as we step away from real live events, to the extent they are captured in fiction, then you are putting a flag into a moment in time. And I think there's a certain value in that. And I find my books naturally compelling me to do that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And there's certainly a lot going on in that book, and from not only the political backdrop, the plot thickens, so to speak, with creating a false situation one place to the reality someplace else, which is always good fiction writing, and a lot of the character development, emotionalism, and things of that nature. One of the questions I'd like to ask you is what I saw in the character development, particularly with Mo Katz, for example, is that he continued to evolve in his relationship, his in his profession and the likes. But he started out as a criminal defense attorney, and he defended some pretty ugly people, um, I would imagine. And now here he is on the right side of the law. And so when you're a criminal defense attorney, you know what that's like. You've been a prosecutor, so you're on the opposite side. So you're doing everything you possibly can within the law to try to get someone convicted if you believe they committed a crime. Defense attorneys do the opposite. But then when you get to a real life situation and where they try to run their life by the rules, how do you deal with that dichotomy?
Yeah, so it's difficult, right? And I think Mo Katz, I try to embody that in Mo Katz. When FDR appointed Joe Kennedy, the head of the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, somebody commented that Joe Kennedy was the wrong person for it. And FDR commented in return that it was good to have a fox guarding the henhouse. I think, and I've been on both sides of this. I've been a prosecutor. I've also been a defense attorney. I think a good prosecutor, and it's not unusual. Many people who have been on one side of the fence gravitate to the other or vice versa. And I think that you become a richer attorney if you have both defended people who either are guilty or claim or in fact are innocent, even though there is a strong case against them, while at the same time having had experience to convict people of crimes which you believe and the evidence shows they're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Mo Katz has both of those experiences, and it makes him a better U.S. attorney, but as the story shows, he does not lose his compassion or his emotional feeling for people who have perhaps overstepped the law, but have done so for legitimate, moral, ethical reasons. And he can see that construct in people's lives, and he can compensate for it in a way that someone who has been on one side of the street, so to speak, but not on both, might not be able to do.
Right. That's a good summary. It's a tough situation to be in, I would imagine. But anyway, what I'd like to do now is give the audience our first trivia question, and type in. It's the first person to type into the comments the correct answer. The winners will be announced either later tonight or on Facebook tomorrow. And so get your comment in and get it in quick and get it in correctly. And then after that, we'll turn to Jim and ask him to narrate a section of the book he likes, that kind of without being too much of a spoiler. So anyway, the first question is, when Orville Wright flew across Northern Virginia from Fort Myers, Arlington, to a point in Alexandria, where did he land? So it's an interesting question. So when Orville Wright flew from Fort Myers, Arlington to Alexandria, where did he land? So Jim, you've been involved with John for a while, and first question, what do you think of this book?
I liked it, and it like the other books, there's a lot of activity. There's a lot going on, lots of subplots, characters that are not fighting amongst their personalities tend to fight and clash, but at the same time, it's all for the better good, except for the bad people, of course. This one was all of that, but then it was a little bit different because, in again, without giving any sort of spoilers, it's a book within a book at certain times. If I were to say the beginning of each three main parts of the book. But then there are some of those subplots. It becomes interesting where you don't think it's a part of the story, but it also actually it tells a lot about Mo Katz, his relationship, and it leads to other things. And I'll just go as far as saying that without giving out too much away.
Great. So, read for us a section of the novel, and so the viewers can get a sense of what it's like to hear a book being narrated or an audiobook. I've never listened to a book. I have, reading is reading, listening is listening, but I may get into it based upon how you sound.
Well, and I hope so for sure. The other thing that you keep in mind is with traffic nowadays, especially driving around the Beltway, there's nothing better to do than listen to an audiobook rather than a traffic report, because that's not going to do you any good. So
I can't lean the book against the steering wheel and drive.
I mean, I have seen worse, but it's I would think the lawyer in the room would say no.
Yeah, I think he would.
All
He
right.
would defend me.
Okay, here we go. Katie Fortune raced down King Street like a spring breeze, stopping to stare in store windows, weaving in and out of the crowds, and dancing merrily along the brick sidewalk. Looking at her, no one would have thought that she was lost, alone, vulnerable, and frightened. She looked like an average precocious 4-year-old whose family was trailing behind her. A patron stepped out of the principal gallery and watched as Katie skipped by, heading toward the river. A moment later, the girl ran up the opposite side of the road. The woman noticed that Katie's golden hair was unwashed and matted. Her complexion was waxen, and her clothes didn't quite fit. The woman quickly pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Perhaps it's none of my business, but there's a little girl running unattended in the 200 block of King Street, she said. The dispatcher asked for a description. It matched Katie's. He asked for the woman's location and the direction in which the little girl was headed. Then a message went out to the police that the little girl they were searching for had been found. The closest officers were on the upper end of King Street near the Masonic Temple. They drove down to the river and began searching on foot. Streets, stoops, alleys, and stores were inspected to no avail. Abby Snow accompanied the police. At times, she seemed to lead the effort. She created an air of anticipation among the search team. It was only a matter of minutes before Katie would be found. Then, a report came about a blonde-haired waif at the intersection of Cameron and Washington Streets, and another Katie sighting 3 blocks further up Henry Street. A third report placed the little girl on Prince Street. Katie had become a whirling dervish. I don't think we're going to find that girl until she's ready to be found, said one officer, hitching his breeches and catching his breath as he trotted behind Snow.
Wow, that was fabulous. Thank you for reading that.
Thank you.
So, Katie is a young girl, and John, she's a character that's evolved. So, give the audience a little bit of where she started and where she is in Roaches Run.
Yeah, so first I just want to talk about character development. One of the criticisms of Dangerfield Island was that there wasn't sufficient character development. Well, there couldn't be, because I myself was unfamiliar with the characters in the book. And that may sound to someone who isn't a writer, but it's only through time, as those characters become more of your life, and as you become more of their life, that it all sort of finds complete expression. Katie is born in book 1. Her father, Tony Fortune, is killed on the night of her birth. Mo Katz gets a large settlement for Katie's mother, Maggie Moriarty, which regrettably Maggie squanders on drugs and alcohol. By book 4, Maggie is a mess. She's strung out, she's living off of Cameron Run, and she's trotting her little girl along with her rather than having her in a safe environment. Katie becomes a central character in another way in this book, and that is the friction between Katz and his own girlfriend, Abby Snow. Abby wants a family, Mo does not. And Katie, through a series of fortunate and unfortunate circumstances, will find her way into Abby and Mo's house before the book is completed. I also, Ralph, in this book, used a series of flashbacks which further give you a sense of who these people are, who Mo Katz is, who Abby Snow is, where they've come from, and why the child has such value in Abby's life. So these characters, these fictional characters, have developed my own life in my being able to bring a sense of evolution to theirs.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Relationship between Abby and Mo, and um, there is such a tension building there that you. One of the things I felt in that was I didn't know whether they were going to make it or not. Right? Is that it seemed something that was solid in the previous books now was teetering, and there's other forces that come into that. But that was I liked her character development. Talk about some of the other characters who also have evolved. I think the relationship with Stone and Katz evolved a little bit more in this book as well.
Yeah.
Can you talk about? Yeah.
So first, let me just say, Jim, thank you so much for that reading. It was beautiful. It was great listening to you, the cadence, everything about it.
Thank you.
And you brought so much to the story that you embellished the words in ways that I did not when I wrote them. So I thank you for that. There's tension, Ralph, between Sherry Stone and Ralph. Sherry is introduced in book 2 in Jones Point. At that point, she's a detective in Alexandria. And I try to create a yin and yang relationship between Mo and Sherry so that they both look at the same crime, but they're looking at it from different directions. They're helping each other come to a common solution in solving the mystery. By book 3, they're beginning to work a little bit against each other. There's a kind of a competitiveness that has entered into their crime-fighting efforts. And in book 4, it finds even further expression. They're hiding information from each other. They're stovepiping their own investigations, which is not an unusual thing to see happen in law enforcement, where, let's say, the FBI and the state police are not necessarily sharing information with each other. That's what happens between Sherry Stone and Mo Katz. Now, in the end, they come together because there is an ethical dilemma that they have to approach, and they have to cross that bridge together. But until they get to that point, they really are almost adversaries in trying to solve the crime. It's hard to say where or how that came from. Sometimes I find the characters driving the story on their own, and I'm just sort of catching up with them. But there is this continuing evolution in their professional relationship with one another.
Yes, yeah, I saw that, and it was interesting how that started to evolve. And again, you don't know where it's going to lead. I had mentioned to you early on, I think it was in Jones Point, that I thought there was some evolving sexual tension, but it didn't go in that direction. So, but I might have been reading too much into it at that point. What I'd like to do at this point is ask the second trivia question for the viewers out there. And again, type in the comments section the answer. And there are multiple answers to this, but we're going to take the first two winners who type in any one of the correct answers. So Alexandria has 4 sister cities. Name one. So again, Alexandria has 4 sister cities. Name one. So John, two things. Before I get to John, let me go back. Would you mind if Jim read what he wanted to read when we go into the wrap-up portion of the show? I know
I'd
he had a
love to.
pass.
I'd love to.
I
I'd love to
like,
hear it myself.
yeah, I like so much what he did that I'd like to hear that as well. So, John, what's next? Where do you go from here? What's the next book?
Yeah. Before I just talk about the next book, let me just say that please, folks, if you're listening, you'd like a free copy of the Audible version of this book, email Grace. I'll provide Grace with a code from Audible, and we'll get you a free copy of Jim's narration of Roaches Run. Secondly, all of my books are currently on sale at the pop-up that is operating on Wales Alley, right down by the water. If you go into the store, if you go into the Made in Alex store and say, Ralph sent me, your second book is half price. You have to say to whoever is running the cashier, Ralph sent me, and you'll get the second book half price. I hope you drop by, and I hope I'm there signing books when you do. The next book, Ralph, is going to be a parlor mystery. It's going to be, the title of the book is Gatsby's Corner. It takes place in Gatsby's Museum. And you and I were going to do a show with Jim. The three of us were going to do a show together there last October, a murder mystery, Murder in the Museum. But because of COVID-19 protocols, we didn't do it. I was reading a book by Anthony Horowitz. He's written a series of books. He's done a Sherlock Holmes book. He's done a James Bond book. He's done the Magpie Mysteries. And he's done 3 books with a fictional character called Daniel Hawthorne, in which he takes reality and he puts his fictional character into the book. It would be as though he would say, Ralph, Jim, and John were talking when Daniel Hawthorne walked into the room. So he meshes reality and fiction in a beautiful way. I've never seen it done so artistically, beautifully, and I tried to imitate it by taking our script for Murder in the Museum and transforming it into a 65,000 word book where a real murder occurs on the night that people are presenting this fictional murder in the museum. The entire book takes place in one evening, over about 4 hours, and it's sort of an Agatha Christie on the Orient Express solving the mystery in the midst of a storm in one night. So I hope to have that book out next year. I'm excited. It's my first book that will be done in a first-person narrative. It will be the voice of David Reese, who is the opening character of Book 1, Dangerfield Island.
Fabulous. Look forward to it. Look forward to it. So, Jim, you ready to read?
I am.
All right.
And this is a little later in the book, and I won't tell you what's going on, although the answer to the end of the book is not here. I'll just say that. Here we go. Katz asked Santana and Lynn to join him in his office. If his request interfered with Lynn's schedule for her 2-year-old, she didn't say anything. She and Santana both knew Katz would not be calling a meeting on a holiday unless it was important. Something was brewing. I'm not sure where to begin, Katz said, but I have very serious reservations about whether Phil Landry was inside that van at Roaches Run. I tend to agree, said Santana. I can't understand why Landry would panic and kill himself. He's talked his way out of worse situations in the past. Lynn was never one to subscribe to herd mentality. Yet, in this instance, she also agreed with Katz's analysis. I haven't seen any evidence against Landry that suggests he had to kill himself to avoid prosecution, she said. There was a dust-up about H-Pack backpacks down at Lafayette Square, but that turned out to be a bust. And we all know that there's no truth to the media stories linking Landry and Spades. Spades was under intense scrutiny for weeks, Santana reminded the others. If he had been dealing with Landry, it would have come to our attention. He paused. Which reminds me, he resumed, there are some interesting developments in the murder of the other accomplice, Morley. They found gunpowder residue around the wound, leading to speculation that a gun discharged inadvertently during a tussle. No surprise there, Katz said. It's been my surmise all along. Spates flashed a gun and Morley tried to grab it, or vice versa. Either way, they fell to the ground. And I just lost my place. My apologies. I went to move my pad and it jumped about 300 pages in front of me.
That's okay. That's still a good a point for our readers to get a sense of what it's like to listen to a book. Anyway, look, great having you guys on, John. It's good seeing you again as always. John's a big supporter of the Zebra and the Zebra Press, and he's a great guest to have on. Jim, thank you. Where in Carolina are you, by the way?
Curie Beach, North Carolina, which is basically a suburb of Wilmington, North Carolina, just almost to the South Carolina border.
Yeah, it's beautiful down there, and enjoy it. Wonderful, and hopefully we will see you guys in the new year. Look forward to the next book coming out. Been fascinating. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Hi,
Thank
Liz.
you all. Hello. I am just tuning back in to wrap things up. Thank you, John and Jim. Jim, your reading was phenomenal, and I'm excited to either listen to or read the book now. Maybe I'll do both. John, I'm excited to read one of your works. I have never read any of them before, as I had mentioned, so I am going to start that, and I will probably end up reading them very quickly. Ralph, thank you so much. I'm sad that it's your last show of the year, but I am excited for everything we have planned for next year. So, everyone, I guess that is it for Reading, Writing, and Ralph 2021. I will see you all in the new year, and until then, be the good news in someone's life.
Thank you.